It is Father's Day 2018, and sadly, the biggest story in the news is the inhumane immigration policy, which has led to children being separated from their parents. I thought it would be appropriate to take some time on this Father's Day and draw some much needed attention to this situation and help provide some perspective to just how dire the situation truly is. In 2014, the New York Times reported that the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations had found out that 6 children who were victims of human sex trafficking and were found in Ohio had previously been stopped at the American southern border. And these children were actually released from federal custody into the hands of human sex traffickers following instruction from their parents. And the investigation went on to determine at least an additional 13 children who had also been released from federal custody at the southern border into the hands of human sex traffickers. And there were other children that they believe it also happened with, but they couldn't prove it. So I did a little research into this, and according to Mike Friel of the Customs and Border Protection spokesman, hundreds of children die annually being smuggled from South America through the American southern border. And of course, they're promised a better life. If you can make it across the border, there'll be jobs, there'll be opportunity, and of course, there'll be the welfare state. So hundreds of people, including children, die annually being smuggled from South America across the southern border. And virtually every single person who attempts to make it across the southern border is led by human smugglers. And you can get a human smuggler to help you get across the border for the small price of about 11,000 pesos. Again, this is according to the Customs and Border Protection Agency. So, the reason you have to have human smugglers help people get across the border is because the southern side of the American-Mexican border is actually controlled by the Mexican drug cartels. And without human smugglers assisting you in getting from South America, because these aren't Mexicans, these smugglers recruit people, they promise them a better life all across South America, but they have to come through Mexico, which is controlled by the drug cartels. And if you don't have these smugglers to help you get across the border, then there is a great likelihood that the Mexican drug cartels will get a hold of you, force you into human sex trafficking, force you into a life of prostitution, or even worse, or I don't know, maybe the same, you tell me, force you into a life of slavery. And of course, this is largely ignored by the media, so I thought we would take this time to point out the current inhumane immigration policy that is leading to children being separated from their parents, because we have all this going on as well. It's not just children being separated from their parents at the border. Well, a few weeks ago, a photo was released of children in cages. And of course, everyone was outraged, and rightfully so. Children shouldn't be put in cages. And the media used this to attack the current immigration policy of the current administration. But the current administration pointed out that the photo was actually taken from 2014, so the children that were shown depicted in cages were actually under the care of the Obama administration. But that was just setting the narrative. And now, for the last few weeks, all we've heard about are children being separated from their parents. And it really is a terrible situation. But you have to keep in mind that these children who are being brought over the southern border illegally by human smugglers, along with their parents, have no papers and no close relatives, and they're not citizens of the United States of America. So you could just let them across the border and let their parents across the border, but then America would have no borders and would no longer be a country. And of course, well, if you have no borders, well, we just said the Mexican drug cartels, they control the Mexican side of the southern border, so all of that violence comes across to the American side of the border, and then you have American children, and you have people like Kate Steinle who are murdered, so that's not protecting the children. So what are you supposed to do? Because you can't just let the children over the borders, but the children have no papers, and where are their relatives? In Guatemala? That's going to take some time to figure out where to send them. So I would think the only realistic option is to separate them from their parents, because their parents committed a crime as an adult, illegally crossing the border. Now you could say, okay, well, we could set up a separate detention center where we actually keep the parents and the children together, but many of the people crossing the border, and they're using children, are the drug cartels. So you're putting young children in a closed, confined space where they can't leave with violent drug cartel members. That's not a viable option either. So it really is a lose, 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 lose situation. The entire situation is terrible. So what is the solution? Well, I think in order to find a solution, we have to first identify the problem. Because the problem isn't just children being separated from their parents by federal authorities when they get arrested attempting to cross the border illegally. The problem is also the incentive that incentivizes people to come from South America, paying human smugglers to get them across dangerous lands where the human smugglers themselves, where the Mexican drug cartels might force them into human sex trafficking, might force them into a life of prostitution, might force them into a life of slavery, where there's a good chance they'll die as they're being smuggled across South America. If this is all the problem being the incentive that illegal immigration is permitted. Because for the last 8 years, really longer, it's been well known to the drug cartels, to these human smugglers, who take advantage of people, innocent people, who take advantage of these children, that there is great profit in smuggling people over the border. And of course, people in South America, because they could come to America illegally, that's the way to do it, well, they're willing to take the risk, because if they could get over the border, well, they get access to the welfare state. And now, for coming over the border, they are protected by American laws, which we have much greater freedoms and liberties than those in South America. And they can make more money, have a nicer house, have nicer materials, have food to eat that they didn't have in their home country, and they don't even have to work. Their children are granted better educations. So the incentive is for people to cross the American border illegally. But of course, if that's the incentive, really what's being incentivized is human trafficking, children being forced into pedophilia, into sexual slavery, people being forced into prostitution, being forced into literal slavery, people risking their lives to make it to America illegally. This is all being incentivized by the policy of open borders. So the entire immigration policy of America for the last 8 years is really what has been separating children from their parents. So then we have Donald Trump come along and say, well, we have a big problem at the southern border. And I find it very interesting that the Democrats rolled out this campaign saying he was separating children from their parents, as they completely ignored the human trafficking, they completely ignored the prostitution, they completely ignored the human beings being sold into slavery or indentured servitude, where they'd have to be slaves for years to pay back the debt they took on in order to get the human smugglers to get them over the borders. The Democrats, the media, they conveniently overlook that because they claim to care about children, but they clearly don't. And they just use children as propaganda to make Trump look like the bad guy. But Trump is the one that has been pointing out that all of this violence, all of this taking advantage of innocent human beings has been going on at the southern border, and that it's not right. So Trump actually, he campaigned on deporting the Dreamers and removing illegal immigrants from the country, but he stated that he was willing to work with the Democrats. And if you can look this up, he actually offered essentially amnesty to all of the Dreamers as long as they hadn't committed felonies, plus 1 million people. So he offered amnesty to all of the Dreamers. They could stay in America, plus 1 million illegal immigrants, in exchange for the border wall, which, again, would take away the incentive for people to try to get to America illegally, because they know if they get to the border, they won't be able to cross, and it will be unsuccessful, which will prevent human trafficking, which will prevent prostitution, forced prostitution, and prevent people being sold into slavery. So he offered amnesty for the Dreamers. He offered, in exchange for the wall at the southern border, to disincentivize illegal immigration, the ending of the visa lottery program, which is where the government randomly selects people to be immigrated to the Americas, to the United States of America, and the end of chain migration, in which one person comes here from South America, and then everyone in their family through chain migration is able to come to America. So their children could come, their spouse could come, their aunt could come, their sister, their brother, and before you know it, one person turns into 30 to 50 different people who are allowed permitted entry into America. Now keep in mind, Trump did say that it's okay, we can allow chain migration to the point where spouses and children come, but that's it. Again, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the last thing Trump asked for was the reshaping of the American immigration policy, where instead of the visa program, where it's just people being brought to America at random, instead of chain migration, where once one person gets here, the government can't stop an additional 50 people from coming to the country, and replace it with a system of merit-based immigration, where people are permitted entry into the United States of America if they have credentials where they show that they could be a benefit to America. So if they show that by coming here, they can create jobs, they could support themselves, not be on the welfare state, so the taxpayers don't have to pay for them, they could actually contribute to the tax base, that they could be an economic advantage to the country, or perhaps they have a skill, maybe they're a doctor, where they could be an advantage in the way that they provide services to the people of America. Then based on that, they would be granted entry into the country. And again, this policy would lead to tons and tons of black and brown people being brought to the country. So anyone who says this is racist, that's just ridiculous. But the Democrats weren't interested in negotiating with Trump on this, and they said, no, we're just going to call you racist and say that you're bad for children. But if it is the incentive of open borders combined with a welfare state that is leading people to risking their lives, risking imminent death, working with scumbag human traffickers, crossing land controlled by drug cartels, where there's a good chance you will be captured, forced into a life of human trafficking, forced prostitution, pedophilia, or even slavery. If that system is incentivized by the open borders, by the welfare state, and the Democrats want to keep that system going, the very system, mind you, that is causing parents to be separated from their children at the borders, because as we stated earlier, these people, they have no papers, and their closest relatives might be in Guatemala, so who are you supposed to give them to? Well, as we've seen from the New York Times article in 2014, which I'll post below, well, you could very well be giving them to human traffickers to be sold into pedophilia and sexual slavery. So it's the very policy of the Democrats that is leading to children being separated from their parents, because it's the only viable option. That is leading to human sex trafficking, which is leading to forced prostitution, which is leading to slavery. Forced slavery. So by not negotiating with President Trump, by just using children as propaganda and saying that Trump is separating them from their parents and it's inhumane, by using propaganda and saying that Trump is racist and xenophobic when he clearly offered amnesty, essentially amnesty to all of the Dreamers, by refusing to negotiate with President Trump, the Democrats are continuing to incentivize the taking advantage of children, human trafficking, forced prostitution, and slavery, and children being separated from their parents. I don't know what is more inhumane than that policy.